And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. Wild steelhead are native to the watersheds of the northern Pacific Rim, with their historic range extended from Russia to the border between California and Mexico. Unlike their cousins, the Pacific salmon, which die at the end of the spawning runs, steelhead are capable of repeating these migratory journeys multiple times throughout their lives. We open our archives to 1992 with chair of the Wild Steelhead Campaign, Bruce Hill.
There's a new office in Smithers. It's not very big nor glamorous, but it is important. This is the only office of the Steelhead Society of British Columbia.
This office is also intended to send an unequivocal and clear message to the federal government, specifically the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, that there are major problems with salmon and steelhead on the Skeena, and that we hold them responsible for this situation, and we want some action now. The one thing that all fishermen have in common, whether they're native fishermen, commercial fishermen, or sport fishermen, is the need for healthy fish stocks. When we speak of stocks disappearing or being damaged, we must bear in mind the awesome capacity of this river to enrich the lives of those who will treat it with respect. Our First Nations have been telling us this for years, and I, for one, am a believer. This is not an issue of not enough steelhead for sport fishermen. This issue is about the small tributary creeks and streams that are almost empty of fish. Buck Creek, the Nangeese, Trout Creek, the Nanika, Johansson Creek, the Kitwanga. These are the places that must thrive if the Skeena is to thrive. And to thrive, they must contain more than hordes of pink salmon. They must contain wild coho and chinook, steelhead, and sockeye. And the emphasis is on
new blood's been injected into the Steelhead Society in the last few months. Some credit a major symposium in Smithers last fall as the catalyst that got interest going again in trying to save wild stocks of fish.
Well, that's really true. You know, there are a whole bunch of new people in this whole thing, and with them they've brought a level of interest and concern that didn't exist in the Smithers area for a long time. And it's really great to see, because the people that have been involved with it for the last 7 or 8 years really need that assistance, that kind of energy, the additional ability to take on new projects like this one, like the video project, to kind of tie the whole process all together and make it work. And so, like I said, I have great expectations. I think this is a real positive move forward, and I'm really happy to see it.
The video project is the first priority for the Wild Steelhead campaign. It'll document the plight of steelhead and salmon in the Skeena system.
Well, people sometimes get a misconception of the state of the Skeena because of some of the enhancement that's been done on it. So like what we have to show are the consequences of the management policies that have been in place. Like what the video is going to show the incredible amount of pressure that's being put on the resource and the consequences of that pressure. Basically the little creeks and the streams that are in people's backyards that are empty of fish, that used to have fish. I was just talking to the mayor of Smithers and about when he was a boy and the farm that he lived on here in Smithers and the Canyon Creek that ran through it. It was full of fish of all sorts, trout, steelhead, coho, and he said last year they had 1 pair of pink salmon spawning in that creek. That's the story that's going to be told.
The ultimate hope is that if we do a video on the problems of the Skeena, that it's going to be outdated very soon, that it's going to be no longer needed because the problems will be solved.
That's perhaps a pretty auspicious goal.
That's optimistic, no doubt about that. But we're looking at avenues of presenting to the general public, and again, just raising the awareness that there is a crisis on the Skeena and in other populations of wild steelhead around the province.
Extinction of species is the key in generating public concern over the issue. Not that you can't go down to the riverbank and take a steelhead home for dinner, but that if things don't change, some species of fish will simply fade out of existence altogether on the Skeena system and on other BC river systems as well.
The spawners are down to just over 1,000 spawners in the Thompson River, spawning steelhead. And according to provincial fisheries biologists, there should be 20,000 spawners on the Thompson system.
That's pretty bleak.
Yeah.
I mean, is that those types of numbers? If you've got 1,000 spawners, can you bring that back?
Well, you can, and but you start getting down to really small numbers of fish, then you start getting what is known as a risk of extinction. And the U.S. fisheries biologists have set 200 breeding fish, 200 returning spawners, as the critical threshold of extinction for a population of fish. And if you get fewer than 200, you have greater chances of extinction because of genetic dilution in the population and environmental catastrophes like droughts or floods or things like that. So there are already some rivers in the Skeena watershed system. The Sustut, 26 spawners counted last year. Officially, those fish are probably extinct, and but the fish just don't know it yet. But they're below this 200 adult fish population level that's a critical threshold for extinction. And these are the kind of things we're talking about. Again, it's not an allocation, it's extinction, threat of extinction of fish.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. A U.S. report states 20 years ago, Pacific salmon were found to have disappeared from 40% of their native rivers and streams across Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and California. In places where they remain, like the Columbia River system, the number of wild steelhead returning to streams is estimated to have plunged as much by 98%. Let us return to the archives with Bruce Hill.
It's just inappropriate in this day and age that we should be eradicating species of any kind of creature. I mean, it's just not on for the, this is 1992, not 1892, and it's just not acceptable, I don't think, to society that a species or a stock of fish is going to go extinct. And we're right on the verge of extinction with many stocks in the Skeena, if not over the brink with some of them.
So the threat of extinction, but can the tide be turned? Is there time to ensure wild stocks of steelhead and salmon continue to exist for future generations?
Well, in some rivers, I know on the Puntledge River in Vancouver Island, I think they had 2 fish return this last year, and they're both males, so 2 wild males, so that river is gone. I mean, but there are other rivers that are in trouble that can be saved, and that's the the nux of this whole. That's everybody wants to work now because we're sitting on the edge right now.
Do you think, I guess, the $1 million question, can something happen in time though? I mean, can we still save the steelhead, the wild steelhead?
Well, I guess that proof will be in the pudding there. I'd like to say yes, but because of the nature of the problem, my own concern is that we're going to be really hard pressed to do that, and time will tell. I wish I had a crystal ball and could answer that question. I really do. I think that's the biggest concern that everybody that's involved with this has about the issue, is whether or not solutions can come quick enough. We're facing a real biological window in terms of putting a solution in place with some of the stocks, and basically we need a solution in place in the next few years, or we're going to be going backwards real fast.
I think we're really fortunate in the Skeena in that that the river is fairly well intact, that we haven't had a lot of habitat loss, in that there is some genetic stock, quite a bit of genetic stock available in some cases. Like Bob Hooten, the regional biologist, has made this statement, is that the biological capacity of this river is basically intact. So we're in a unique situation here in that the Skeena is the classic mixed stock fishery in North America, and we're suffering the consequences of that, of course. But we're also far enough north that we haven't lost everything yet. So we have the opportunity here to be the first place in North America, really, to do it right. But the longer we wait to get on with solving these problems, the more difficult it is to solve these problems. You know, like we are literally losing stocks. They're dropping off the map. And fish are not like trees. A tree can grow in 100 years or 200 years, it'll regenerate. But when you lose a fish stock, that's a product of 100,000, 200,000 years of evolution. And when you lost that, it's not renewable in any time frame that we can recognize. It's gone. It's gone for good.
I think what makes sports fishermen a powerful group once roused is they're not particularly moved by economics, though according to a recent survey, theirs is an industry worth $1.4 billion per year in this province. But they're moved by emotion, by some sort of spirituality they attach to their favorite recreation.
I've always had this vision of when I'm retired or older to go down to the Maurice River and be an old curmudgeon beside of the river and sort of give the young fishermen a hard time and be able to tell them how it was in the old days. So it's where I get my relaxation. It's what I do as a hobby, and I am a commercial guide. It's what I do for a living. So it's part and parcel of my life. It's why I live here. It's why I came here.
I've been a fisherman and for all my life, and I've been an ecologist. I'm an ecologist, and I'm interested in ecosystems. And I've worked with other endangered species of birds back in the Midwest, and so I've always had an interest in this kind of thing. But I think the main thing that keeps all these people going is they go out and they fish, and they see how magnificent these rivers and these ecosystems are, and the fish that are in them, and they see that they're going downhill, and it just tears apart inside, and people say, hey, no more, you know, we've got to stop and do something about this.
It's part of the lifestyle of the North to be able to go down to the river and catch a fish. And when people go down to the river and they can't catch a fish, and they know that that river used to hold fish in multitudes, yeah, then they get upset. They get really emotional.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. The Portuguese language is one of the most important spoken around the world today. Not only is it the sixth most spoken language in the world, but it's also the presence in most all the continents. Let us return to the archives as Frank Tavares shares how he arrived to Kitimat.
The majority of the Kitimat Portuguese community comes not from mainland Portugal, but from the Azores, a group of islands in the Atlantic off Portugal's coast, the most westerly of which is closer to Newfoundland than Portugal. In the early 50s, Canada allowed 5,000 immigrants from Portugal, and 1,600 of those came from the Azores. One long-time resident didn't arrive in Kitimat right away.
No, I had a contract for CN for a year, and I worked for CN for 11 months, and for the other months was in Ontario, in a sawmill in Amigos. It's 80 kilometers west of Sudbury.
And what made you decide to come to Kitimat?
Well, it's another history. Yeah. Three of us working at sawmill, and one friend of us was in Kitimat. And we used to write to each other, and he said, why don't you come up to Kitimat? I said, what is that? Well, it's in British Columbia, and I make $1.65 an hour. And I told you, I said, well, let's pick it up and go.
$1.65 an hour in the mid-50s was a lot of money.
We were making $1.15 then.
I see.
At sawmill. So it was a big difference, and we packed it up and we moved to Kitimat.
When he did come in 1955, there were about 200 of his countrymen in Kitimat, but he didn't get the Alcan job he was looking for at first. There were 600 people with the same idea, and on the way to catch the train to Vancouver to continue the job search, he found another opportunity.
I was walking from the campsite down to River Lodge,
yes,
up to come to the city center to take a train to Vancouver. And we look up above, it was a sawmill there. And I told my friends, well, gee, let's look up there and see what is the job for us. So we went up and we finally got a job there.
At the sawmill first?
Yes. We worked there from 55 until 57 when the sawmill shut down.
So that was the sawmill making lumber for the homes and so on?
Yes, for the construction, for the cement construction. All the construction in Kitimat, the lumber was cut in the sawmill.
When shown a picture of a friend's cousin, he decided he wanted to get to know her better.
It was well there, and we courted for about a year and a half, and I got married in 57.
But you didn't go back to Portugal?
No, I got married by Prague. I was too cheap to go down there. Not too cheap, but I guess those days the money was not the best thing to get. You know.
So there was a full-scale wedding in Portugal with someone standing in for you?
Yes, her father was standing for me. And I had an arrangement with the Catholic Church in Kitimat. Had a special mass for myself. And on the evening, I drank with the friends and have a few drinks there and there.
So your wife arrived in Kitimat?
My wife arrived in Kitimat in March the 13th, 1958. We've been living here ever since. 2 kids, Tony and Susie. They're all growing up.
Yeah. And it's obviously worked out very well?
Oh, beautiful. Can't complain. Can't complain. If everybody should get married the way I did, probably things work better.
Though many immigrants believe they would just spend a few years, make some money, and go back home, very few ever did. Louis de Silva came to Kitimat in the 50s, before moving to Toronto for a few years to play professional soccer and work as an immigration consultant.
The idea that started in 1953 was like Canada was a country that has all kinds of lumber, but we believed that the Dora bills were hanging up on the tree. And all that came in was 60 immigrants come in 1953 from an island between our island and the Azores and the mainland called Madeira. And then immediately it was some from the Azores. These people come over here out of pure sheer necessity. It was hard to maintain a family with 5, 6, families with 10, 12, 14 kids. And that was the opportunity of immigrating over here and making some money. So the basic idea was to make some money, that now they could go back and rent a little space, a little bit of land, that they could sort of grow some vegetables to help with the necessities of the family. Nobody realized then that working that hard, that amount that they could save would be much more than they've ever dreamed. Now they were able to support their families back home while they were here working to a level that they could never dream before. So as that money increased, they figured, well, the dream could be a lot larger. I got a little bit of land, maybe I can get some money for the house. And then when they established that, then they figured, well, if I do all this, why should I go back? Why don't I bring the family over? And you know, as soon as
Brothers, sisters, cousins followed in a steady stream. Though the mainland Portuguese went mostly to Europe, emigrants from the Azores came mostly to Canada and the US.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
The Azores, Portugal are best known for whale and dolphin watching. The archipelago is a pit stop or home for about the third world species. Year-round, residents include the sperm whales, common dolphins, and bottlenose dolphins. In this final segment of Open Connection, Luis de Silva shares why he can't go home.
If all the people from the Azores will return today, we'll sink the islands. I don't know kind of production lines they must have
it's like
there.
the Scots. If all the Scots went back to Scotland,
the
place would be overpopulated.
Oh, no space for it. It's incredible.
Yes.
But the great majority, to be more specific on your answer, of the immigrant are from the Azores.
Okay.
The exhibit, sponsored by the Portuguese consulate, traveled across the province. There was some very fine filigree work shown off in these miniature boxes, extremely difficult to make out of gold and silver, and which show a real Moorish influence. Most people familiar with the culture will recognize the cock, the symbol of good luck from an ancient legend.
An innocent man was going to be hanged for a crime he had not committed, but he could not prove this. And in desperation, I guess, he prayed to the Virgin of St. James, and St. James is one of the big patrons in this area. And I think obviously, St. James, knowing that he was innocent, was going to do something about it. He had to visit the magistrate, the judge, one day at his home. And while there, the magistrate was having dinner, and he was prepared to eat a roasted cock. So the poor innocent man said, look, I am innocent, and if I am, this cock is going to crow. And lo and behold, the cock did. So of course he was saved. And from them we have this cock in the households just for protection.
Cork, for which Portugal is famous, is used extensively. And there's obviously a real love of using bright decoration. No exhibit would be complete without a display of weaving.
Well, this bedspread comes from Alto Alentejo, and we have seen the colorful work of the painted wood objects, and here we see also a lot of colors. It's a bedspread, but it's also a blanket. So it performs two functions. This is a blanket to keep people warm while they are sleeping, and it's colorful because it's also a bedspread for daily use. And it's made of merino wool. Now, in this area, the merino wool is quite well known and is used widely in blankets. And that, of course, is very appropriate for blankets because that type of wool is warm but light, so it makes very comfortable blankets. Another use for these blankets is they are used by shepherds to keep themselves warm, and also they can be used to put on top of donkeys or horses. So it's very widespread, and they are very beautiful.
Some of the other blankets on show were contributed by members of Kitimat's Luso-Canadian Association. The quality of the linens was remarkable, and it was the tradition for every young woman to make the linen needed for her own household.
They were made by the girls in preparation for marriage. Generally or traditionally, when a girl reached puberty, she will start working on her dowry. And she will have to make all her linen. That means the towels, as we can see here, tablecloths, sheets, anything that is needed for a new household. Of course, the girl will have been prepared beforehand by the mother and grandmother. And she will have been very adept by that time in embroidery, weaving, perhaps also lace making.
The embroidery, cutwork, lace, and crochet shown were exquisite.
These are made of bobbin lace, but then we also have crochet lace there.
This is incredible quality.
It's exquisite. It's so fine. I am amazed at the quality of that work.
And this is very traditional. Again, we've seen this at the multicultural exhibition in the Portuguese booth. This metallic paper work.
Yeah, and it's purely decorative. So it's very joyful, and it doesn't have any other function but to decorate.
And it has a little...
Fishermen from the Azores often went whaling, and on show were these whalebone carvings made by a Kitimat resident, Manuel Alves. The dolls shown here were dressed in traditional clothes for display on Kitimat's community float, which has a multicultural theme. The Portuguese have a great seafaring tradition and have settled all over the world, but the great waves of emigration only started in the last century.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.